Don't you think it's about time for a podcast that's more fulfilling? One that's about the vibrant exchange of ideas and perspectives that happens when we actually come together. We got you covered. Welcome to the Deep Blue Project, where the depths of conversation meet the waves of personal experience. This is a real, raw, and unscripted show about everything from leadership lessons to self-awareness, wellness, and the latest current events. We cover it all. We have a rotating cast of guests as we share our personal stories, insights, and opinions on the issues that matter most. Plus, we have a blast while doing it. The Deep Blue Project. It's not just a podcast, it's an experience. And now your host, Chris Workman.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Deep Blue Project. I have the auspicious occasion to have my friend, who I've known for quite a few years, Mike Lawson. He is joining us today. Mike was a Wilmington police officer. He was a bigwig in the FOP, but I am going to let him kind of let you know a little bit about himself. Mike, welcome to Deep Blue Project, man. It's glad to have you.
Chris, thank you so much for having me. And I just want to, send kudos to you for doing this project. I first learned about it probably, maybe a month or so ago. And I keep doing it because I like what you're putting out there. And I've watched a few of the podcasts and thank you so much. Because,
thank you, man.
we definitely need it because, law enforcement is a tough profession, just like And yeah, I've been around for some time. I started my career back in '09, fresh out of high school, college. I just turned 21. Got hired by the Wilmington Police Department, and first time law enforcement officer in my family. So there was no one as far as I could turn to, as far as any relatives or anyone close that would help me out or give me advice. But it's something that I kind of felt like I needed to do. It's something I wanted to do. So I chose Wilmington. I grew up in a small town that you're well familiar with, Ellesmere. And after I got on the police department, I had to move into Wilmington, which was not any issues, but that was a requirement back in the late 80s, early 90s, where we had to live in a city to be a city employee. So I lived in Wilmington for quite some time. But yeah, during my career, I did 23 years. I worked in patrol, worked a short stint in the vice squad, but most of my time was spent up in detectives. I did 13 years in detectives and then retired in 2012, which brought me to my job now, working for a small community bank here in Delaware in charge of security and loss prevention.
As Mike mentioned at the end, this is Delaware. Mike and I had met. I had come from Pennsylvania, and I started working for the town of Ellesmere, which is borders right outside of Wilmington. They touch each other. So on top of a lot of other things, we had a chance to meet through cases that came through Ellesmere, came through Wilmington, and we've known each other ever since then. I went there back in 2002. Gosh, 2002. And, it was great because like any place else, Delaware's pretty close knit. So we work a lot hand in hand. And when we had major cases, a lot of times we would reach out to the Wilmington detectives to help us out. So one of the things that I wanted to bring Mike on, and when we had the conversation, is in the midst of working in a big city, we all know it's a little different. Not that things can't happen in a small town. Let me just say that. I work in a small town. Trust me, I know stuff can happen in a small town. But working in Wilmington back in 1997, I believe it was, right, Mike?
Right.
Mike had an incident, so I'm going to let him kind of walk you through this.
Yeah, so it was back in April 1997. I was working patrol. I was actually a field training officer, and I was training a rookie. He had less than 2 weeks on. And we were working the midnight shift, and we had just done some paperwork, and we were close to the police station, and he had some paperwork we had to finish up as far as field training officer paperwork. So we were doing that paperwork, and I told him, I said, hey, go unload the shotgun. We keep the shotguns in our trunks back then in a car load. So he went and he unloaded the shotgun. And then once he got back to the car, we received a call about shots being fired at the Amtrak maintenance facility up in the northeast side of Wilmington. So when that call came in, Obviously, it's very unusual because it's the maintenance yard. It's not the train station, which is closer towards Center City, but it's the maintenance yard where they do all the maintenance on all the different locomotives all throughout the Northeast. So it's a really big facility with different warehouses and different buildings where they actually do the work on the engines and locomotives. So we got the call, and we were probably the second or third car to arrive. And once we got there, as soon as we got out of the vehicle, you could hear the shots, bang, 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 bang. And employees were running towards us. It's 7:30 in the morning, so it's something that you would never think would happen that early. And this is before they had anything called active shooter. They would call it someone going postal, because they had a couple incidents where postal service would flip out and start shooting people at the workplace, but way before active shooter happened, or it was actually termed active shooter. So I immediately told my rookie, I said, hey, and it was Hector Garcia. Hector was with our department for a while, and he actually went over to the county police. And Hector recently retired just this past year. Great guy, great rookie. So I said, hey, grab the shotgun. So he grabbed a shotgun, gave it to me. And I quickly just speed loaded it, just put one round in it because I knew that it was unloaded because we had just unloaded the gun. And we just ran towards where the shots were being fired. So we ran probably 80, 100 yards, and we met up with a couple other officers who had responded. And at the time we got to the building where the shots were being fired, the shots stopped. So we kind of peeked in and we looked to see, if we could see the person who was shooting. It's kind of dark in there, so we really didn't have good line of sight. And then our sergeant, Sergeant John Randolph, I'm sure you know John very well.
Yeah.
John said, "Hey, he's up on the catwalk. He saw the person." So we made a decision. We went inside. Four of us went inside, and we got a good position on him because he was up on top of the catwalk, just pacing back and forth. And once he was up there, we made contact with him, and he could see that we were in police uniform. And I had the shotgun pointed at him, and we're telling him, hey, come on down, give yourself up. But he wasn't willing to do that. So he goes back and forth, and eventually he pulls out a handgun, and he points it towards us. And at that time, I fired a shot, just one single shot from the shotgun, struck him, and then he fell over and fell 25 feet down to the floor where he was deceased. So nothing that I ever expected as far as my career. Obviously, when you take the oath, you know that there's a chance that something could happen as far as you having to use deadly force, but was never prepared to actually pull the trigger until that day. And thank God for the training because you do get tunnel vision and you rely highly upon the training. You train down at the shooting range. At that time, I think I was on a SWAT team for maybe 3 or 4 years. So I had some experience with SWAT. It's just training. I mean, as soon as I saw the threat and I knew that, he was going to shoot at us, I just pulled the trigger and that was it. So apparently he had some issues as far as mental illness. But before we got there, he shot and killed his foreman and then shot 2 others. And when we pulled up, he was actively still shooting at people. There was one person up in a crane and he was actively shooting at him. And people were just fleeing from the buildings. Just one of those things where you never think it was going to happen. I was more worried that day because I had a traffic case or something in court because I'm working midnight shift. And court, it's supposed to start at 9 o'clock, but hopefully the judge arrives by 10.
Right.
So you're not going to get any sleep until you go to court, and then you may not get home until 12, 1 o'clock, and then finally, hopefully, get some rest and then go back to your midnight shift. But I was more worried about the court case than having to deal with something like this.
Right.
But I fully thank you training as far as dealing with the threat, seeing it, and knowing that, hey, you have to do something.
One of the things that we talk about now, that we're talking about 1997 here.
Yeah.
So we all know, I mean, the way it was when we came into this business. So I think some of that, and I'd have to, and I'm going to venture to guess, but I'm going to let you elaborate on it. It's just back then, like something like that happens, you result on your training, but as far as having to take that action, it's just you moved on. At that time, you felt like you moved on. Because that was kind of what everybody told you. Like, great job, kid. You did a great job. It was a good shoot. You did what you had to do. But they're not maybe realizing what that toll's going to take on you either short time after that or a long time after that. So
Yeah.
how did that kind of play into what you went through following having to do that?
Yeah. As soon as it happened, they kind of just grabbed me and put me in a police car. And then we went to the police station and they got me two attorneys, one to handle the civil procedure and then the other to handle the criminal procedure because even though it's a clean shoot, I mean, this guy had two guns. He had a 9mm and he had a 38. And he just killed his foreman and then shot two others and was actively shooting when we got there. Still has to be investigated by the Criminal Investigations Division, along with the Attorney General's office and along with Internal Affairs. So your ass kind of puckers up when that first interview and they read your Miranda rights and they say that they're investigating a homicide and you're sitting across from the detectives. It's like, well, wait a minute. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't need an attorney. Well,
Right.
that was my first stint as far as dealing with the union and making sure that you're represented because I've talked to guys over the years and just like my shooting where everything's clean, you want representation because you never know what's going to happen in the future. You can get civilly sued. You can get, have charges pressed against you for whatever reason. I guess a day later is when I gave a statement, which now I think may be a little bit early. Usually they want that cooling down period, 48 to 72 hours. But I gave a statement the very next day. So after leaving the police station, I went home. Did not have to turn in my sidearm because I used a shotgun, which was great because if I had to turn my sidearm in, I'd be a little bit upset because you feel protected having that weapon with you, especially after being involved in something like this. So when I got home, I'm coming off of midnight shift, and the adrenaline just keeps you up. So I was probably up for the next 22 to 23 hours without any sleep. Once I got home, I started getting phone calls. Probably close to 200 people called within hours because they heard about the incident. Back then, we really didn't have many cell phones. We had pagers, but I wanted to make sure that my family was aware of what happened and I was okay. So let them know right away. Call my parents. I had other relatives calling. They heard about it. And then it starts getting on the news, and then eventually it makes the paper, and your pictures in the paper. So there's a lot that you end up dealing with. Having the attorney representation is something that every FOP member needs. Every law enforcement officer needs. That was very helpful. And that kind of helped me learn the process. And that's when I got involved with the FOP. One of my, great friends, Vinny DeSabatino, said, hey, we're going to make sure you have representation, even though this is clean. You never know what's going to happen. And, I listened to Vinny and Vinny got me involved. So, but yeah, that's kind of, how I got involved with the FOP.
That's how we kind of got to know each other, other than the Wilmington thing, is you did a lot with the FOP. And I think that's interesting that incident kind of puts you in that limelight to see how they handle things like that and how they took care of you. I had to deal with that once as a detective when we had an officer get involved in a shooting at Banning Park. Some people who are listening who are not familiar with police work might not understand that one of the things that happens is if you're involved in a officer involved shooting, they take your weapon. Before we do that now, we have someone bring another weapon out. So we don't take it away, we exchange it. That's our livelihood. I think sometimes people don't understand that. Our safety net. So taking that away from someone can cause a little bit more of I don't want to say a mental breakdown, but it can cause some angst or anxiety because you are removing that. So touching on that, Mike, I think was a great point that people don't seem to understand.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just like any other occupation where if you're a firefighter, they take away your axe. A construction worker or a plumber, they take away one of your tools, a hammer, screwdriver. You just feel very awkward without it. So luckily that didn't happen. There were officers who thought that I used my sidearm and were willing to give me their sidearm because they kind of expected that, hey, he's going to be without a sidearm until they issue him a new one. But that didn't happen. But yeah, thankfully, it's something I didn't have to go through as far as having that kind of anguish or dealing with that. One thing that I do want to say is that you have to have support, whether it's fellow law enforcement, family, friends, and you have to be honest with them because at first it's no big deal. It's just part of the job. Cops get that John Wayne syndrome, that Superman syndrome, where They feel like, I'm tough, I can handle this, but it's like a cancer. I mean, whenever something like this tragic event happens, it just stays inside of you until you can get it out and you can talk about it, just like we're doing today, because it helps with the healing. If not, it's going to stay inside of you. And just the things that we see on a daily basis is just unbelievable. And you have to be able to have someone to talk to and rely upon as far as, just talking and talking about how you feel.
I want to kind of touch back on that, Mike, because one of the things that you discuss for anybody who's listening again, I try to go back because it's tough sometimes when I do this conversation because I do know people. I know the people that I'm speaking to, so I have to make sure that I let you guys kind of know some of the background. And Mike also talks about this and talks about how he discovered that he had some PTSD from this incident. So
Right.
I think what it'll help our listeners, Mike, is when did you kind of realize that incident began to affect you? Was it right away, or was it a few years down the road?
It definitely was not right away. It took some time with me. And what happened was within a couple of weeks, I was back to work. Any kind of a lethal force where someone is killed, you're not supposed to go back and return to duty until all the red tape is done, which means the investigations have to be done. You have to go see the psychologist, the city psychologist. You have to make sure that you're mentally fit to return to duty. That's not what happened with me. They put me right back to work, not in patrol, but they put me up in records. So I was up in records, and it's when they came out with that new IBIS machine, and we had just gotten it, and an officer would log the ammunition, and whatever was picked up from a certain case, and log it into the machine. And so I started doing that for a couple of days, and then finally the FOP president came up and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I was told to return to work, so I'm here." And he said, "Well, do you want to be here?" I said, "Yeah, I want to be here, but I don't want to be in records. I want to get back on the street." I was training a rookie, wanted to be with my platoon. So they said, "No, you can't do that yet because you haven't been cleared." And the FOP president said, "Well, if you don't want to be here and they're not going to put you back on the street, you need to go home. And you need to make sure that you do see the psychologist and you do go through everything." So I reached out to personnel and said they took me out of records. They sent me home. And that's when everything started as far as the psychological phase of it. So they sent me to the city psychologist, and I had probably half a dozen sessions with the psychologist, and then they categorized me as having PTSD. So they sent me to a specialist, and then I had about a dozen or so meetings or sessions with the specialist who was out of Philadelphia and focused on PTSD. And she basically said, "Look, you don't have PTSD." She said, "Other people in your scenario may have some of your symptoms, but your symptoms are normal. You'll have a nightmare. You'll think about what happened. You will get anxious, but your symptoms, what you're showing right now, you don't have PTSD." So I was thrilled to hear that, because when I thought of PTSD, I thought about, hey, it's an illness, and I didn't want to get categorized of as having an illness. I didn't want to have to, retire early, go out on disability. At that time, I had, I think, 9 years on a job, maybe eight and a half years. So I still had a full career ahead of me. And that's not what I wanted to do. So I was thrilled that she said, "Hey, you don't have PTSD." So she signed off on that. And then eventually, about 6 months later, is when the investigations were finally cleared and I was able to go back on the street, back with my platoon and back to patrol. So I was happy just to get back. But during that time, I mean, you have a lot of time to do nothing. So I worked construction on the side. I had a lot of thoughts as far as, well, maybe I just retire and go into the construction business, because I was doing a lot of side jobs, drywall, painting, plumbing work, electrical, and working for a couple of people just to keep me busy. Because when you're out like that, you're not getting paid any kind of overtime from the police department. You're not getting paid shift differential. You're just getting paid your regular pay until you get back and you can actually work.
Well, I guess one of the things, Mike, that's important, to me is if she's, you were talking to somebody who I'm going to have to go back and just go, like, how did you feel, though, while she was telling you, like, okay, you don't have PTSD because, okay, remember, we're talking about 1997, 98 people. So that's also that thing where, they're telling us, suck it up and move on. But
Yeah.
that doesn't seem like that would be the correct thing to do, because as far as I'm thinking about it is, how are you feeling about it, whereas somebody else is trying to tell you
Yeah.
you don't have that.
For me, I felt better because of the illness perspective, knowing that I didn't have an illness. Now, whether I had PTSD or not, I don't know. You got one expert saying I don't, and then you have the city doctor who is not an expert in PTSD saying you do. Uh, but yeah, it was definitely a weight off of my shoulders because you feel like, hey, I have this illness, I'm sick, but you're not. It's something that's natural and something that happens. But in my case, with what the experts telling me is that I didn't have it, so I was thrilled that I didn't have it. A lot of times, just to think about what's going on in your life and what you want to do, and yeah, I wanted to go back to work. I didn't want to miss anything, and I wanted to finish out my career. You kind of feel like you're being punished because you're doing your job, and the next thing you know, you're out of work. You're not doing your job, and you feel like, hey, I can't go back. What's taking so long? And did I do the right thing? Could I have done something different? So those different things go through your mind.
You had a good 14, 15 years after that. And did you think that had any effect on what you did for the rest of your career, or how you handled the rest of your career?
Yeah.
And
So
maybe how you treated other people, because you were, I mean, Mike was, president of FOP. He did a lot of things in the state of Delaware, and he
yeah.
got a lot of things done. Do you feel that stemmed from that incident and having to go through that?
Yeah, I learned a lot, just like I said, that's when I got involved with the FOP. I don't know if it benefited my career. I did end up in detectives, and that's where I wanted to spend most of my time, which I did 13 years in detectives. It was definitely a learning experience for me. But with me, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. But once you go through this and you kind of, it's not expected. It's something that happens, and you never think it's going to happen. It kind of makes you think what could have gone wrong, what could have been different as far as if something else happened, or it's just a lot of things go through your head. But like I said, Chris, I mean, it's the training. One officer told me, he said, "Hey, one thing that you have to realize is that you're able to do the job. When it comes down to life or death, sounds kind of weird, but you can pull the trigger. You're not going to hesitate." And that's kind of what I was worried about moving forward, was that next call. Am I going to hesitate? Am I going to think, well, I don't want to go through this again? And when I went back on the street, they said, hey, we're going to put you out west. We'll put you in 19 car by yourself towards Rockford Park, out with the squirrels, where you're going to have to experience anything that you really experienced before, just to keep you calm down for a little bit. And my very first call leaving the police station was a report of a man with a gun at the Amtrak train station.
Wow. Wow.
So, I mean, just the things running through my head, I was like, oh my God, it's just, again, so it turns out that it was unfounded, which happens a lot where, you get a call about a man with a gun, and it turns out that it wasn't, and that's what happened. But it was the Amtrak train station. And so all those things just come back again.
Yeah,
And,
I think one of
you
the
go,
things we always talk about is triggers. That was a
oh,
trigger, like
oh
big
yeah,
trigger, big trigger.
yeah.
I'm going back for a man with a gun at the same place where I had to deal with all this. Like, boom, trigger.
Right. It was crazy because they're putting you in a position where they think they're helping you, but it doesn't help because they're putting you right back in that field. And sure enough, it's a dangerous job. We all know it's a dangerous job, especially working in a city environment. A lot of shootings, a lot of other things that happen as far as gangs and drugs. But yeah, it's just one of those things where the very very first call is a man with a gun. So that kind of helped me because after that, I'm like, hey, I can do this. If there was any doubt, I knew, I'm still in the game. I'm right back at it. And with that, it was a great career, and just did ended up doing 23 years. So very 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 happy that I did that, and happy that I served the city of Wilmington.
I think your story is great because we get that perception sometimes that if this happens, what am I going to do? Now it's going to be different for everybody. You're right. I've had over the years when we talk to rookies or we talk to people coming in, and the first thing, what's the first thing people always ask you? I got like teenagers or kids ask you, have you ever pulled your gun?
Right.
Have you ever had to shoot somebody?
Have you ever had to shoot anybody? Yeah.
Yeah,
That's been
you're looking
asked.
at them
Yeah.
going, I can say no. You have to say yes. But then you look at them and go like, well, do you? Then if you tell them no, the first thing they want to say to you is, uh, do you think you can?
Yeah.
I can't answer that question.
Yeah.
You can answer that
Yeah.
question.
Right.
I cannot answer that question because you're not going to know. And I don't care. You could be the biggest bald guy out there. You could be doing this job for 20 plus years. You could be doing whatever, but until that situation happens, you can't tell me what you're going to do
No.
because you're just going to have to resort to training and hope that your training comes forward because you don't know. You can't answer that question. You can. I cannot.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's something that I think a lot of officers struggle with, and you never want to put yourself in a situation, obviously, where you have to use lethal force, but knowing that you can actually do it is totally different. You definitely look at things differently, and like I said, I had tunnel vision. I saw the whole event, and everything was slowed down. And there were other officers beside me when this all happened. They may not have seen what I saw, but I knew that there was a threat, and I just relied upon my training and did what I had to do. But it's just one of those things where you never wish it has to happen to someone. And going back and saying that it's something that changed my life is definitely a true statement.
Now that you've been out of the game for a little bit, you've been out for what 12 years now, right?
Yeah, 12 years. Yep.
2012. You retired, right?
Yeah,
2012.
2012. Right. Yep.
Yeah, it wasn't long after I left Ellsworth. I know you left not long after that. So
Yeah.
how's that been? I mean, as far as your transition, because I'm going to get into something different because a lot of people don't realize, once you get out of this job, once you're trying to find something else, sometimes that can put a little wear and tear on the way you feel and what you're doing because you're so used to that that camaraderie, that police, I guess you want to say, lifestyle that you're doing for so long, and then you kind of you retire and you have to go out and do other work. So how's that kind of transition been for you?
So the transition for me has been great. You're moving into the private sector from the public sector. A lot of people have difficulties because they are used to that public sector as far as doing things differently, especially when you do a full career, 20 plus years as far as law enforcement. But for me, the private sector was really a smooth transaction. I knew that leaving detectives, I still wanted to be able to investigate crime. I still wanted to be involved. So I was still involved with the FOP. I got involved with Crime Stoppers. I was on the board with Crime Stoppers. I was actually the chairman for 8 years with Crime Stoppers. So staying involved really helped me, and it opened up doors for me because when the bank was looking for someone to hire, they were looking for someone with prior law enforcement, not just on the security end, but also the investigative end. Having a degree in criminal justice, having the knowledge as far as working detectives for several years, investigating cases. The last 4 years, I investigated strictly financial crime. So I knew a lot of the fraud investigators at the different banks. And when I was, going to interview for the job, I reached out to them and said, "Hey, anything you can give as far as advice, for my interview," and they helped out. And like I said, the bank was looking for someone with law enforcement experience.
That's awesome. Your life's not over once you get out of law enforcement, guys. Some people, I mean, I know we make a big deal of it. Sometimes we all talk about that, going, "What am I going to do when it's over?" You can survive after law enforcement.
Oh
You
yeah,
can do it. Now, I know most of us, like, you're still kind of, I mean, if you want to say you're still kind of in that law enforcement realm, but you find something that's your niche and that you want to do, and you know you enjoy it. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. Some of the things that we talk about, like with your mental health and wellness, with being trying to look at things that they didn't do for us when we were young cops. We were all, unfortunately, we'd work the late hours, like you said, Mike, and then we'd leave, and then we'd all be like, all right, who's on midnight shift? Look, I'm going to tell you guys, we have a bar that is right outside of Wilmington that this thing would open at 8 in the morning for the midnight guys getting off. So half the time you would
we were
go
there.
there,
We were there. Yeah, we were there.
because Because 8 o'clock in the morning was your 5 in the afternoon. So
Yeah. Yeah.
once you get used to that, you went and you talked about what happened, and because everybody worked together. But those
Yeah.
times they go away, but they're not totally gone. You can survive after this. But the biggest thing that we try to do now is try to realize that you need to take care of yourself. Getting sleep, using great coping mechanisms, and talking. Find somebody, please, to talk to. I don't care who it is. At least have people to talk to that you can trust. You know, not those guys that are like, you're going to go tell them and they're going to be like, they're going to be walking next to your buddy going, Chris got a problem. He told me her.
No. No.
You don't want that guy. You don't
Yeah.
want that guy. But you have to have healthy outlets. And one of the things that we are talking about and what we try to do is try to generate them healthy outlets. And if you're young, like if you're just starting in this job, if you got, I don't care if you're in academy. I don't care if you're listening to this and you're in academy, start talking to people now. Have somebody that you're comfortable talking with. We have a stigma, and that stigma problem is it's hard for us to bring this mental wellness thing into law enforcement right now. Because Mike, you know, being in the part of the FOP, what's the first thing they're saying? Oh, if you bring mental health people in here, somebody says, you know, I'm messed up. Well, what are you going to do? Well,
Right.
figure it out. Instead of ignoring the problem, figure it out. So if it's a problem that you're bringing people in, and you can't tell, you know, the older generation, like, hey, we're going to bring a mental health person in here, and we want you to check them. We want them to check you out. No, that's not why I'm bringing them in here.
Right.
Go have a conversation. It's private. They're not reporting to me. And
Right.
then I don't care what you talk about. Talk about your dog. Like, just get used to talking to someone and doing
Yeah.
something other than what we used to do.
Right.
Sitting at the bar and drinking or hanging out or, you know, opening up the door to the bar and it's morning and you're like, I didn't believe I was here that long.
So one thing that I do is, and you can see, you know, behind me, I like to hunt and I like to fish. That's my stress reliever. Just getting out there in the woods or, you know, on a pond or in the Delaware Bay or heading up to New York to fish the Delaware River. That's my stress reliever. So you have to have something, but it's something that you don't think is going to happen. But when it does happen, you really aren't planned or have a plan to deal with it. So if you can try to have a plan as far as if it does happen, you'll be more or better prepared. With me, after my incident, they created, I shouldn't say they created, but a couple other officers who had been involved in shootings or having to use lethal force. We had a group with another therapist, and we would meet weekly and just talk about different things. You know, it usually wasn't about our incident, but it was just things that we were feeling or things that had transpired. We went back to work. You're back with your fellow teammates and they're teasing you. And it's like, I really don't want to hear that. I just want to do my job. And it almost becomes like a broken record where you have to tell the story again. And then 10 minutes later, someone else comes and they want to hear the story. And that's great. And that's great for the healing process. But believe me, it's like a broken record. And you really don't want to have to be explaining that over and over and over again. And sometimes you have to give people some time. But having a group session really helped me out as well, because you're dealing with your peers. You know, these guys are on the street with you, you know, every day, and they've been through it. And now you're talking about different things, and you know, you form that group, and you really form a great bond because you know it's you know we're not all Supermen, you know, and you definitely need to talk about it and get it off your chest.
That's a great point because we talk about those things, having that group of people that aren't going to ridicule. They're going to be like, you know, man, I dealt with that too. It's almost kind of like AA, like NA. You have to have a group of like-minded people to make you understand that, dude, you're not broken. This is stuff that everybody is going through. I mean, and most of them are the people that are sitting right next to you. It could be the person next to you busting your stones.
Yeah,
They're going through the same stuff.
yeah. I never lost any sleep over anything that I saw except for one thing, and it dealt with a child, and that was the thing that upset me the most. You know, especially having children, seeing a innocent child get hurt or something happen to them. But yeah, I mean, you know, you see death, you see dead bodies, you see just terrible things happening. Even with this incident in '97, I slept fine, except for those first couple days where the adrenaline rush was just there, and you couldn't get rid of it, and you just couldn't sleep.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we talk about now. And it kind of seems like we wish back in '97 or back in whenever you started this job. I mean, you wish that the things that we talk about now were talked about then, because it wouldn't seem so bad.
Yeah.
Luckily, you had some of that support and you handled it well. But there's some people out there that they're not going to handle that well.
They don't have the resources, um, or the right people around them, and that's what you have to do is you have to give them something, because if you don't provide something for them, they're not going to ask. I would have never asked for a group session unless they came to me, because I'm not going to go ask for it, because that's just my mentality where I don't need that. But when I say, hey, just come out once and see how you like it, and I loved it. The camaraderie and forming that bond with those other guys and dealing with the job. It's about life. And we're all humans, right? We do a job that most of us are grateful for, and most of us will do it for free, believe it or not. It's just one of those things that, you see so much in such little period of time, that it just builds up, and it's a cancer. It just keeps on growing. And you got to get the support and get out there and just, get the help.
Unfortunately, that's just the nature. That is the nature of this job. We go from call to call to call, from tragedy to tragedy. Nobody's calling us to say, hey, come have a piece of cake. No, they're calling you because something's going on
Something
that
bad's
you
happening,
have to
right?
deal with. Something bad is happening. You're either dealing with two people yelling at each other to an all-out assault or a shooting or whatever. But you have to go on to the next one and go
Right.
on to the next one. And if you don't feel over a period of time that that's not affecting you, I'm sorry to tell you, it is. You may be sitting there thinking it doesn't. It does. My friend
Absolutely.
Liz, I talk to my friend Liz all the time. She says it every single time we talk. I don't care when it is. I don't care what you think. It can happen today. It can happen tomorrow. Or it can happen 10 years after you retire. Something is going to hit you, and if you don't deal with it now, it's going to hit you like a freaking meteorite when it does, and it's going to put you to your knees instead of trying to cope with it little by little. And
Right.
that's where we need to do those things for our officers now and for our officers who have been doing this for a long time. Whatever you need to do, just you got to let them know it's okay.
Oh yeah.
That they're not going to lose their job over it. Please go talk to somebody, because I know you were there because you were standing right next to me when it happened. Just like you
Absolutely.
said,
Absolutely.
you're standing right next to me when it happened. So, Mike, I very much appreciate you coming on, my friend, and telling people your story and getting into this conversation, because I think sometimes we get locked into that. Like, oh, it's always bad stuff. No, people can come out of things on the good side also, but you need to want to do it. And when people offer you to help, like you so eloquently put it, I I wasn't going to do it because I wasn't going to ask for it. But when they came to me, you know how many of us have done that? How many of you listening right now have done that? Have the chat, do something. So, Mike, what would you like to close it off with, man? Give our listeners some words of wisdom, because you've done it, you've been there.
So where I am today is what, I hear it every day. I see it every day. Law enforcement is different from when I came on. Chris, even from when you came on, I mean, you could see how it's changed. I love doing the job. I would go back and do everything over again. But if I had to come on and apply today, I probably wouldn't apply, because you guys have so much pressure, a lot more pressure than we ever had, because now everyone has the phones. They want to get their 5 minutes of fame, as far as you having to make an arrest, and whether you're right or wrong, you're still going to be judged. And it's not fair, because 99% of guys and girls in law enforcement are doing the right thing. Yeah, there's a couple bad apples out there, but there's bad apples in every profession. We could have a whole different discussion on that as far as why there's bad apples, but your job's difficult. So please make sure you get help if you need it. Not everyone needs help, but listen to that person on your shoulder and just say, what, maybe you're right. Maybe I should talk to someone. Maybe I should talk to my peers. There's different programs out there that your departments offer, and especially with the FOP. So yeah, definitely get the help. But I feel for you guys and girls, and like I said, I would not do it today. It's just totally a different job, and my heart goes out to everyone. And I salute you, because it's probably the most difficult job in the world.
Mike, you did your time in this job also, and you went through some things in this job, and you've been there. I personally know that you've been there for a lot of officers in the state of Delaware through your connections and through being with the FOP and everything that you have done with that you have been that leader through that while you were in law enforcement. And I appreciate that from the bottom of my heart, brother, because I've watched you do it. And I thank you very much for the time you put in. And I thank you very much for being on here, man. We don't get to talk a lot since you're not in law enforcement anymore, but we do see each other playing golf once in a while. So
Yes,
that is a good thing. But I thank you, my friend. And I definitely thank you for taking the time, my brother. And you stay safe. And if you ever need anything, you just call.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Deep Blue Project. As a father, husband, friend, and someone who loves to chat about anything and everything, Chris brings over 3 decades of public service experience to the table. With a background in firefighting and law enforcement, along with degrees in criminal justice and behavioral science, he's seen it all, and he's learned a thing or two along the way. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on LinkedIn and X at Deep Blue Project. Find our website at deepblueproject.com. And to reach out, send an email to deepblueproject@outlook.com. Keep keeping it real, and we'll see you next time on the Deep Blue Project.